I've been sitting on this for years, watching other people spill their guts on here, telling themselves they're doing it for closure or karma or whatever. Maybe I am too. I don't know. What I do know is that the first bad thing I ever did didn't stay in the past. It followed me. It shaped how I think, how I justify myself, how I cross lines later that I once swore I never would. This happened when I was 16. Old enough to know better, young enough to believe consequences were a myth adults invented to scare you. I wasn't some movie version delinquent. I was invisible. Decent grades, single mom working nights, a lot of time alone. I felt overlooked in every possible way, like the world owed me something and just kept forgetting to pay up. The crime itself wasn't flashy. No violence. No mastermind stuff. Just theft. But it wasn't random theft. It was personal, and that's the part that still knots my stomach when I think about it. I had convinced myself I deserved what I was about to take. That it was correcting some cosmic imbalance. That lie, telling myself I was the victim, that was the real beginning. I didn't wake up that day thinking, today I ruined my moral compass. It felt smaller than that. More reasonable. That's what scares me most in hindsight. It felt logical. Necessary even. Like a door I was finally brave enough to open. I'm writing this because people like to say, everyone makes mistakes as a kid. Maybe. But some mistakes don't fade. Some of them teach you who you can be if you let yourself. And once you learn that, you can unlearn it. If you're still reading, just know this. This was the first time I crossed the line on purpose. And it was easier than I ever expected. The backstory matters, because without it I just sound like another dumb kid stealing for kicks. This wasn't about thrill-seeking, at least not on the surface. It started with money, like these things usually do, but underneath that was resentment that had been fermenting for years. My mom worked double shifts and still came up short. Rent notices taped to the fridge. Power getting shut off for a few hours at a time. I wore the same hoodie every day because buying new clothes wasn't even a conversation we could have. Meanwhile, I spent most afternoons at my friend Evan's house. Big place. Finished basement. Snacks that weren't rationed. His dad barely noticed me except to nod or grunt when he walked by. One afternoon, I was sitting in their kitchen doing homework while Evan was upstairs gaming. His dad left his wallet on the counter. Thick. Worn leather. I remember noticing it the way you notice a ringing noise once someone points it out, suddenly impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the wallet. It was what it represented. Ease. Security. A life where money was so normal you could forget it lying around. I didn't take anything that day. I just clocked it. Filed it away. Over the next few weeks, I started building a story in my head. His dad wouldn't miss it. They had more than enough. I needed it more. It wasn't stealing, it was redistribution. Temporary borrowing. A victimless crime. I told myself I was just leveling the field, like life had cheated me and I was correcting the score. That's the thing about rationalization, it doesn't feel like lying when you're the one saying it. It feels like clarity. Like you're finally seeing through the rules everyone else blindly follows. By the time I actually decided to do it, the decision felt old. Settled. I wasn't nervous yet. I felt calm. Focused. That should have been my first red flag. Once the idea hardened, my brain flipped into this weird logistical mode. I didn't think of it as planning a crime. I thought of it as being careful. There's a difference, at least that's what I told myself. Careful people don't get hurt. Careful people don't get caught. I started paying attention to patterns. Evan's dad worked construction management, early mornings, unpredictable afternoons, sometimes home by 3, sometimes not until dinner. Fridays were best. He usually stopped for drinks with coworkers. The house would be quieter. Looser. Less eyes. I noticed where things were kept. The wallet almost always landed on the kitchen counter or the hall table by the garage. Cash was folded, not stuffed, Another detail that stuck with me for some reason. I told myself I'd only take bills, no cards. No IDs. That way it wouldn't be real stealing. Just cash changing hands. Like the universe rerouting funds. I even rehearsed it. Walking into the kitchen. Picking it up casually. Sliding bills out without looking rushed. Putting the wallet back exactly how I found it. I practiced not rushing because I'd read somewhere that rushing makes you sloppy. I don't remember where I read that, but it lodged itself in my head like gospel. What's messed up is that I didn't feel like a criminal. I felt like an understudy stepping into a role life had already written for me. I was quiet about it, but inside I felt almost competent. Like I'd discovered a skill I didn't know I had. The night before I did it, I barely slept, not because I was scared, but because my mind kept running the same loop over and over. Entry. Exit. No mistakes. I remember thinking, after this, things will be easier. That thought, after this, was another line I didn't realize I was crossing. The day it happened was painfully ordinary. That's the part that still feels surreal. No dramatic build-up, no ominous signs. Just a gray Friday afternoon, and the sound of Evan yelling at his game upstairs. His dad wasn't home yet. I knew because the garage was empty, and the TV downstairs was off. Evan's mom was at work. The house had that hollow, echoey quiet that big houses get when no one's really in them. I remember my hands feeling too warm, like all the heat in my body had migrated there. We were supposed to be doing homework. I told Evan I needed the bathroom. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. No cracking, no giveaway. He barely looked up. The kitchen was exactly how I'd imagined it. Sunlight coming through the window, dust floating in it like it always did. And there it was, the wallet, sitting on the counter, slightly open, like it was inviting me to confirm every bad thought I'd been nurturing. I stood there longer than I should have. This was the last clean moment. The last second where I could have walked away and nothing would have happened. I remember thinking, if I don't do it now, I never will. That felt less like a warning and more like a challenge. When I picked it up, my heart finally kicked into gear. Loud. Fast. I was suddenly aware of every sound, the fridge humming, footsteps upstairs, my own breathing. The leather was softer than I expected. I slid the cash out like I'd practiced, eyes flicking to the doorway every half second. There was more money than I planned to take. That was the second decision point. I hesitated, then took a little extra. Not all of it. Just enough that it felt worth it. I put the wallet back exactly where it was. Same angle. Same spot. I even nudged it a little so it looked untouched. When I walked back upstairs, Evan didn't notice anything different. But I did. Everything felt sharper. Louder. Like the world had turned the contrast up just for me. I had crossed the line. And nothing exploded. I didn't spend the money right away. I thought I would. I'd imagined that part clearly, but once it was actually in my pocket, folded and warm, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt radioactive. Like if I used it too soon, it would announce itself somehow. The walk home was the longest I can remember. Every passing car slowed my heart. Every adult glance felt like scrutiny. I kept replaying the moment in the kitchen, convinced I'd missed something obvious. A camera. A reflection. A sound I shouldn't have made. I checked my pockets 3 times just to make sure the cash was still there, which makes no sense, because part of me almost wished it wasn't. That night at dinner, my mom talked about her shift and how the manager was cutting hours again. I nodded in the right places, answered when spoken to, all while thinking about the money sitting in my backpack like a secret tumor. I felt guilty, yeah, but guilt wasn't the main thing. It was fear. Pure, humming fear. The kind that makes your teeth feel loose. The next day at school, Evan was quiet. Not unusually quiet, but enough that my brain latched onto it. Every time he looked at me, I thought, he knows. He didn't. Of course he didn't. But once you've done something like that, innocence stops being your default setting. Suspicion becomes your baseline. By Sunday, the house still hadn't erupted. No angry phone calls. No accusations. No police. That's when something shifted inside me. The fear dulled, just a little, and in its place was this dangerous sense of relief. A whispering thought, maybe I got away with it. That relief scared me more than the fear ever did. Because it felt good. By the second week, the silence had settled in. No blow-ups. No sideways comments. Evan was back to his normal self, loud, careless, complaining about homework like nothing in the world had shifted. Which meant the only place the crime existed anymore was inside my head. That's when the justifications evolved. I started telling myself that if his dad had noticed, he would have said something. Adults always say something. That the missing cash must have blended into their budget noise. That maybe he'd spent it himself and forgotten. The lie got smoother every time I replayed it. Less friction. Less resistance. I finally spent the money on groceries for my mom and a pair of new shoes I desperately needed. When she thanked me for being responsible with my saved allowance, something twisted in my chest. I told myself the ends justified the means. That I'd turned something bad into something good. That I was, in some warped way, being helpful. But there was another feeling underneath all of that, something I didn't want to name. Control. I'd reached into someone else's life and changed mine without asking permission. No forms. No applications. No waiting. Just action. I started noticing other opportunities after that. Not acting on them, yet, but seeing them. Unlocked doors. Careless habits. People who assumed the world was fundamentally safe. I hated that part of myself for waking up. I also couldn't put it back to sleep. The crime didn't end when I took the money. It ended when I stopped feeling like I needed to apologize to myself for it. The first sign that things weren't as clean as I'd convinced myself came out of Evan's mouth, completely unprompted. We were sitting on the bus, half asleep, when he mentioned his dad had been in a bad mood lately. Nothing dramatic. Just snappier. Short fuse. Complaining about losing cash and not knowing where it went. Evan laughed it off like it was some dumb adult problem. I didn't laugh. My ears rang so hard I barely heard the rest of what he said. Losing cash. Those two words bounced around my skull like they were looking for a place to land. I stared out the window and nodded at the right moments, hoping my face wasn't betraying me. That night, the guilt finally showed up the way people always describe it: heavy, suffocating, unavoidable. I imagined his dad standing in the kitchen, turning his wallet upside down, retracing his steps. I imagined him accusing Evan, or worse, thinking someone I trusted did this. I wasn't just stealing money anymore, I'd stolen peace of mind. I told myself I'd stop. That this was a one-time thing. That I'd never cross that line again now that I'd seen the ripple effects. I meant it too. At least I thought I did. But the damage was already done. Not to them, they'd move on. To me. I'd learned that you could hurt someone quietly. That consequences could be delayed, diluted, or misdirected. That sometimes the worst fallout happens entirely inside your own head, where no one else can see it. And once you know that, the world doesn't look the same anymore. I tried to go back to being the version of myself that existed before the wallet. I really did. I focused harder on school. Helped my mom more. Kept my head down. On the outside, I probably looked improved, like I'd matured overnight. Inside, though, everything felt staged, like I was playing a role I no longer fully believed in. Every interaction with Evan's family carried this low-grade tension. His dad's voice made my shoulders stiffen. If he walked into a room unexpectedly, my pulse spiked. I started avoiding the kitchen entirely when I was over there, as if proximity alone could incriminate me. What messed with me most was how normal they were. No suspicion. No side eyes. No interrogations. His dad even gave me a ride home once and asked how school was going, told me I was a Good kid. I remember staring at the dashboard, nodding, feeling like I was floating outside my body. That comment stuck with me. Good kid. It felt like a fragile label I'd already cracked but no one else could see yet. I started wondering if being good was just about not getting caught. If morality was less about what you did and more about whether anyone noticed. At night, I replayed alternate versions of the story. Ones where I put the money back. Ones where I confessed. Ones where I never touched the wallet at all. None of them felt real anymore. The real version was the one where I'd done it, and kept going with my life like nothing had changed. But something had changed. I just didn't know yet how far that change would reach. There's a moment after you do something wrong where your brain starts testing the edges of it. Poking. Asking questions it pretends are hypothetical. Mine started with a single, quiet thought I hated myself for having. What if that wasn't the worst thing I could do? I didn't want to steal again. I need to be clear about that. I wasn't itching for it. But the idea had lodged itself somewhere deep and uncomfortable. That rules weren't walls, just suggestions reinforced by fear. And fear, I'd learned, could fade. I noticed how easily people trusted me. Teachers. Neighbors. Parents. I was polite, soft-spoken, invisible in the right ways. That invisibility felt like camouflage now. Like a resource I hadn't known I possessed. The scariest part wasn't the temptation, it was the familiarity. That same calm, logical voice from before started resurfacing in other situations. Not pushing me to act, just narrating possibilities. You could. It wouldn't be hard. No one would expect it. I started wondering if this was how it always began. Not with a big moral collapse, but with curiosity. With the realization that the world ran more on assumptions than safeguards. I didn't cross another line then. Not yet. But I stopped believing I couldn't. And that belief, that quiet permission I gave myself, was heavier than the cash had ever been. Looking back, this was the point of no return. Not the crime itself. The shift afterward. The moment I realized I was capable of more than I'd ever admit out loud. I came close to telling someone. Not in a dramatic, fall-on-the-sword way. More like a leak in a dam, small, accidental, testing pressure. It happened with my mom, late one night while she was folding laundry. She was tired in that bone-deep way that makes people honest. She said something about how money stress makes you do desperate things, how she hoped I'd never feel cornered like that. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, the words sitting right behind my teeth. I imagined saying it. Just enough of it. I took something that wasn't mine. Not naming names. Not giving details. I wanted absolution without consequences. I wanted to be told I was still good. But then she looked up at me and smiled, small, proud, and said she trusted me. That she knew I'd always make the right choices. And that was it. The moment passed. I nodded. Went to my room. Sat on my bed in the dark and realized something ugly about myself. I was relieved. Not because I'd spared her pain, but because I didn't have to face what telling the truth would cost me. That night, I learned another lesson I still carry. Sometimes silence isn't forced on you. Sometimes you choose it. And once you do, it starts choosing you back. I didn't confess. I didn't get caught. And with every day that went by, the version of me who would tell the truth felt further away, like a childhood friend you lose touch with and assume you'll reconnect with someday, even though you never do. High school kept moving, like it always does. New classes, new stress, new versions of the same problems. On paper, my life improved. I got a part-time job. We stabilized a little financially. The original reason I'd given myself for stealing quietly expired. The problem was, the habit didn't. Not the habit of stealing, at least not yet, but the habit of mental shortcuts. Of bending a situation until it fit what I wanted. When I messed up, I got better at explaining it away. When I was tempted, I got better at pretending it was a one-off thought. That internal narrator I'd unlocked never shut up again. I started noticing how often people broke small rules without consequences. Teachers fudging grades. Managers shaving minutes off time cards. Adults lying casually, efficiently, without drama. It made my 16-year-old crime feel less like an anomaly and more like an early enrollment. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if Evan's dad ever figured it out. If he blamed himself. If he tightened up, became less trusting. I told myself I didn't want to know. But really, I was afraid that knowing would force me to feel something clean and painful instead of this dull, manageable weight. The crime became a reference point. A quiet benchmark. I've already done worse than this, I'd think, in unrelated situations. That thought didn't push me to act, it removed resistance. It lowered the bar of what felt unthinkable. I didn't become a bad person overnight. I became flexible. And flexibility, I learned, can be just as dangerous. By the time I left that town, the crime had shrunk in my memory. Not in importance, just in sharpness. It blurred around the edges, like an old photo you've handled too many times. What stayed crystal clear was the conclusion I'd drawn from it. This is who I am when it matters. I didn't think of myself as a thief. I thought of myself as someone who could cross a line and keep functioning. Someone who didn't fall apart. Someone who could live with secrets. That distinction mattered to me back then. It felt sophisticated. Adult. In college, when people talked about finding themselves, I already felt like I had. Not proudly. Just resigned. I knew what I was capable of, and I knew how to compartmentalize it. That made me calmer in risky situations, more persuasive in arguments, better at reading rooms. It also made me colder in ways I didn't notice until much later. Every big decision after that carried a shadow comparison. This isn't as bad as that first thing. It's amazing how many doors that sentence can open. Amazing and horrifying. I wish I could say the lesson I took from my first crime was never again. The truth is messier. The lesson I took was that identity is negotiable. That you don't shatter when you do something wrong, you adapt. And once you realize you can adapt, the fear of becoming someone else loses its power. That realization didn't ruin my life immediately. It just quietly edited the rules. There came a point where I couldn't honestly refer to that first crime as an isolated incident anymore. Not because I'd gone on some spree, but because I recognized the pattern it had carved into me. The through line. The way I approached problems with an escape hatch already built in. I caught myself mid-justification one day, different situation, different stakes, and felt this cold sense of déjà vu, same mental math. Same calm voice explaining why this exception made sense. That's when it hit me, the first crime wasn't a bad chapter. It was a template. I started tracing it backward. The planning. The waiting. The rationalizing. The relief. The way consequences softened with time. I realized I'd been repeating those steps in non-criminal ways for years, cutting ethical corners, letting other people absorb fallout, telling myself intent mattered more than impact. What scared me wasn't that I'd become reckless. It was that I'd become efficient. Quietly strategic. The kind of person who rarely gets caught because he rarely panics. For the first time, I stopped romanticizing my younger self as a desperate kid who made a mistake. I saw him more clearly, a kid who learned the wrong lesson and carried it forward like a survival skill. That's when I understood something brutal. Your first crime doesn't just change what you're willing to do. It changes how you think. And thinking is much harder to police than actions. 2 parts left. And this is where it stops being about the past and starts being about reckoning. I wish there was a single moment where everything came to a head. A knock on the door. A confrontation. Some external force demanding accountability. That would make this story cleaner. Easier to package. That didn't happen. What happened instead was slower and harder. I ran out of ways to lie to myself. The older I got, the less convincing my justifications sounded. Not because the world got stricter, but because I finally did. I started seeing the cost of my flexibility, not in arrests or scandals, but in distance. In relationships where I stayed guarded. In moments where I chose control over honesty without even thinking about it. I realized I'd been using that first crime as a permission slip for years. I already crossed that line, so what's one more compromise? It wasn't that I wanted to be worse. I just didn't want to feel naive again. Vulnerable. Like the kid who believed being good would somehow protect him. Owning it meant stripping away the backstory I'd relied on: poverty, resentment, youth, and admitting something simpler and uglier. I wanted something, and I took it because I could. Everything else was commentary. That acknowledgement didn't fix me. But it did something important. It put the responsibility back where it belonged. Not on circumstance. Not on age. On me. And once you do that, you can't hide behind your own past anymore. If you're reading this because you're on the edge of doing something you've already justified 6 different ways, here's the part no one tells you. The act itself is rarely the most dangerous thing. It's the permission you give yourself afterward. I didn't go to jail for my first crime. I didn't lose friends. I didn't get labeled. I got something much quieter and much more permanent, a shift in how I saw myself. Once I knew I could cross a line and survive it, the line never looked the same again. It got thinner. More negotiable. Easier to step over the next time. If I could talk to that 16-year-old version of me, I wouldn't threaten him with consequences. That wouldn't have worked. I'd tell him this instead: whatever story you tell yourself to make this okay will become a tool you keep using. Not just today. Not just for this. For years. You don't stay the same person after your first intentional wrongdoing. You either confront it honestly, or you carry it forward like a hidden credential, proof that you can live with things others can't. That might feel like strength. It isn't. It's just numbness with better vocabulary. I'm not writing this to absolve myself. I don't think confession erases impact. I'm writing it because pretending that first crime didn't matter almost turned it into a lifelong blueprint. So here's my advice: for whatever it's worth, if you've crossed a line, stop pretending it didn't change you. Look at it. Name it. Deal with it while it's still small enough to face. Because the worst crimes aren't always the ones that get you caught. Sometimes they're the ones that teach you who you're willing to become, and let you walk away thinking you're fine.